Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. My name is Jack Bennett, and back in 2017, I decided to take my RV up to the wild expanse of Denali National Park in Alaska. After years crunching numbers as an actuary, I figured some solitude might help me reconnect with the world beyond spreadsheets. I've always been a bit of an introvert, more comfortable with a good book than a crowded party, so an RV trip into one of the most remote national parks seemed like the perfect getaway. I packed enough supplies to last a week, including an embarrassing amount of instant noodles and a stack of mystery novels I had been meaning to read. The drive was long but breathtaking. Towering mountains loomed in the distance, and the trees seemed to stretch infinitely upward. I found a secluded spot near a clear glacial stream, a perfect campsite far from the main trails. Setting up was uneventful, aside from the moment I realized I'd forgotten a can opener. "Great job, Jack," I chuckled to myself. Survived actuarial exams, but defeated by a can of beans. As dusk settled, I lit a campfire and sat back to enjoy the serenity. The sky was a tapestry of stars, more than I'd ever seen back home. I felt the contentment that had been missing for years. Just as I was about to turn in for the night, I noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. It was unusual, given how isolated my spot was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. After all, maybe I wasn't the only one seeking solitude. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the light. As I got closer, the sound of muffled voices reached my ears. Peering through the foliage, I saw a small clearing with an old cabin. Two men were outside, huddled over something I couldn't quite make out. Probably just hunters, I thought, but something fell off. They were digging deep and fast, as if trying to hide something. I stepped on a twig, and the snap echoed loudly. One of the men jerked his head up. He was tall, with a scruffy beard, and wore a worn-out flannel shirt. His eyes scanned the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out sharply. Panicking, I switched off my flashlight and held my breath. "Smooth move," I berated myself silently. After a tense few moments, I heard one of them say, "Probably just an animal." I slowly retreated back to my campsite, every rustle sounding like an alarm. Back at the RV, I locked the door and tried to shake off the unease. Maybe they were just burying trash, I reasoned, but a nagging feeling told me otherwise. Sleep was elusive. Every noise outside was amplified in the stillness. Around midnight, a distant howl cut through the air. "Wolves," I whispered. "Nothing to worry about." The next morning, I decided to hike a nearby trail to clear my head. The fresh air and stunning vistas did wonders for my mood. I even managed to snap some photos that would make excellent desktop backgrounds. On my way back, I noticed something odd. A piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. It looked like part of a jacket, stained dark red. My stomach tightened. Maybe someone got hurt, I thought. But there were no footprints or signs of a struggle. Back at camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to pack up and find a ranger station to report what I'd seen. As I was loading up the RV, a voice startled me. "Leaving so soon?" I turned to see one of the men from the cabin leaning against a tree, a sly grin on his face. "Yeah, decided to cut the trip short," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Shame. Not many folks come out this way. Thought we could share a meal," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thanks, but I've got a long drive ahead," I said, closing the RV door. "Safe travels then," he nodded, but there was something menacing in his tone. I started the engine and pulled onto the dirt path, glancing in the mirror to see him still watching me. As I drove, the path seemed different. Branches hung lower, and the road was rougher. After an hour, I realized I was going in circles. "Impossible," I muttered. I hadn't taken any turns, yet the surroundings were unfamiliar. The GPS was useless, showing only green wilderness. Frustrated, I stopped the RV to consult a map. That's when I heard the sound of an engine approaching. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up alongside me. It was the other man from the cabin, younger, with a shaved head. "Lost?" he asked through the open window. "Just a bit turned around," I admitted. "These roads can be tricky. Mind if I take a look at your map?" he offered. Something in me hesitated, but refusing might raise suspicion. "Sure," I said, handing it over. He studied it briefly. You're way off. Need to backtrack and take a left at the fork you passed about 5 miles back. Thanks, I said, reaching for the map. He held on to it a moment longer than necessary. Be careful out here. Never know what you might run into, he warned, handing it back. Appreciate the help, I replied, forcing a smile. He drove off, and I couldn't help but feel that the encounter was more than coincidental. Deciding not to follow his directions, I trusted my instincts and continued straight. Another hour passed, and the fuel gauge dipped dangerously low. Just when I was about to lose hope, I spotted a sign, Ranger Station ahead. Relieved, I pulled into the gravel lot. The building looked old but maintained. Inside, a middle-aged woman in a ranger uniform greeted me. Hello there. You look like you've seen a ghost, she remarked. Probably just my reflection after days without a proper shower, I joked weakly. She smiled. What can I do for you? I told her about the men, the digging, and the torn fabric. Her expression grew serious. You're not the first to mention strange happenings around here, she said. We've had reports of missing hikers. Do you think they're involved? I asked. We're looking into it. In the meantime, it's best you stay here until we can get you escorted out safely. Stay here? Can I just refuel and go? Fuel supply is low. Next delivery isn't until tomorrow, she explained. Great. Stuck in a horror movie cliche. All right, guess I'm camping here tonight, I sighed. She offered me a room in the back. It wasn't the Ritz, but it beat sleeping in the RV with potential psychos roaming around. That evening, we chatted over canned soup. Her name was Linda, and she'd been a ranger for over 20 years. You learn to read people out here, she said. Those men you saw, I've got a bad feeling about them. Glad it's not just me, I replied. As night fell, a storm rolled in. Thunder echoed through the mountains and rain pelted the roof. Suddenly, the power went out. Backup generator should kick in, Linda said, but it didn't. I'll check it out. She grabbed a flashlight. Mind if I come with you? I didn't want to be alone. Sure. We stepped outside, the rain soaking us instantly. The generator was around the back. As we approached, a loud crack resounded. A tree had fallen nearby. That was close, I yelled over the storm. Linda inspected the generator. Looks like it's been tampered with, she frowned. By who? Before she could answer, a figure emerged from the darkness, one of the men from the cabin, holding an axe. Evening, he sneered. Linda reached for her sidearm, but the other man appeared behind us, wrenching it away. 2 for the price of 1, he laughed. Run! Linda shouted, shoving me aside. Before I could react, she tackled the man with the axe. The other grabbed her, and in the struggle, she was struck hard, collapsing to the ground. I bolted into the woods, adrenaline overriding any sense of direction. Behind me, footsteps splashed through the mud. Branches tore at my clothes, and the terrain became treacherous. I slipped, tumbling down a slope and landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through my ankle. Just perfect, I groaned. I crawled into a hollow beneath a large tree, trying to catch my breath. The rain masked the sound of their pursuit, but I knew they were close. Minutes felt like hours. Then faint voices carried through the storm. Spread out. He couldn't have gone far, one of them yelled. I needed a plan. Remembering my phone, I pulled it out, no signal, and water damaged. Useless. I spotted a fallen branch, sturdy and sharp. Better than nothing, I thought, arming myself. The voices grew louder. One of them was right above me. Come out, wherever you are, he taunted. Time to level the playing field. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged upward, striking him across the face. He stumbled back, shocked. You little? He growled, wiping blood from his nose. I didn't give him a chance to recover. Swinging again and connecting with his knee, he collapsed with a howl. Not sticking around for round 2, I limped away as fast as I could. The other man would have heard the commotion. Ahead, I saw a faint glow. A campfire. Desperate, I headed toward it. Bursting into the clearing, I found a group of hikers huddled under a tarp. Help me, please, I gasped. They stared in disbelief. What happened? One of them asked. 2 men. They attacked us. The ranger is down, I panted. Without hesitation, one of them grabbed a flare gun. Stay here, he instructed the others. Moments later, the second attacker crashed into the clearing. Seeing the group, he hesitated. That's him, I pointed. Back off, the hiker warned, aiming the flare gun. The attacker sneered. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't, the hiker retorted. The man assessed the situation, then slowly backed away. This isn't over, he threatened before disappearing into the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. We need to get to safety, the hiker said. There's a satellite phone in our gear. We'll call for help. They patched up my ankle as best they could. Within the hour, authorities were notified, and a rescue team was on the way. By dawn, helicopters circled overhead. Paramedics attended to Linda, who was injured but alive. The police apprehended the man I had injured. Turns out his name was Jake Mullins, a drifter with a criminal record. His partner, however, was still at large. Over the next few days, a search ensued. They discovered shallow graves near the cabin, victims who hadn't been as lucky. I provided my statement, and the gravity of what happened began to sink in. A week later, I was back home, the ordeal feeling like a surreal nightmare. Then I received a call from the police. They'd identified the second man, Evan Mullins, Jake's younger brother. He was still missing. Be cautious, the detective warned. He might hold a grudge. Great, I sighed. Just when I thought it was over. Months passed without incident. Then one evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photograph of me at the campsite, taken moments before I first met them. On the back, a scrawled message read, "See you soon." I reported it to the police, but without any leads, there was little they could do. I realized that while the physical journey had ended, the aftermath was far from over. Evan Mullins was still out there, and he had made it personal. But this time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I took precautions, security systems, self-defense training. They say numbers don't lie, and statistically, the odds were in my favor. But life isn't always about numbers. Sometimes it's about facing the unexpected with the same determination that gets you through actuarial exams or opens a stubborn can of beans. At least now, I'm prepared. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died, the night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. "Come on, Red, we need your experience out here." What could go wrong? I didn't laugh, not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. "Red, you still with us?" Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. "Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow." Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, me navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it, but there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. "Pete, you see that truck up ahead?" Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. "There's no truck, Red, just us." I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front? It wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area, but as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old, the kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job, the faded red stripe down the side, the same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky, just seeing things. But I wasn't seeing things. Not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again, but this time it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me, I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone. But that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear. But there was nothing, just the thick swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop, let the fog clear." "Negative, Red, as we've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road. The old rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't Jerry. It was Marty. His voice filled the cab clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over. The same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry." I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. I'm so damn sorry. The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck in the middle of the road, blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Red? Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. You still with us? Yeah, I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. I'm still here. The mountains stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind. And I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. My name's Patricia Guzman, and back in 2015, I decided to set out on what I thought was just going to be a peaceful camping trip. I'd rented an RV and was headed up to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, one of the last real wilderness areas left in the Midwest. I'd just gone through a messy breakup, one of those the dog stays with me deals, and thought that getting into the thick of nature might clear my head. Of course, I thought I'd be on my own for a few days, doing nothing more than fishing, grilling, maybe reading a bad detective novel. I wasn't really prepared for anything out of the ordinary. I mean, who would be? So there I was, parked at a site that was basically as far out as my RV could take me. Not a single soul in sight, just me and the trees pressing close, the smell of pine and the sounds of wind rushing through thick branches. I had my own little campfire going, cooking a half-burned hot dog and poking at the coals with a stick. The campsite was wedged between a rock face and a narrow trail that led into a small valley. The only access road was a twisting, barely there dirt path, something you need four-wheel drive just to crawl through, which was exactly why I had chosen it. I figured it would be a nice, quiet evening, maybe even boring. Around dusk, though, I heard something in the distance. At first, I brushed it off as a deer or some animal rustling in the brush, but it got louder. It was the kind of sound that sticks in your gut because it's too out of place. Not the typical crunch or snap of branches you'd expect, but something else, something heavier and somehow purposeful. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something dumb to myself like, "All right, Bigfoot, don't make me come over there." But the noise kept going, each crunch louder, closer, then silence. The kind of silence where you feel like the whole world's holding its breath. Out of nowhere, a man just walked right into my camp, as if he belonged there. No warning, no hello. Just there he was. Tall, wiry, with a face that looked like it had been whittled out of driftwood. He wore an old military jacket, camo pants, and heavy black boots caked in dried mud. His hair hung down like dirty straw, and there was something off about him. The way he stood too still, staring right at me with this dead expression, like he'd seen the worst things imaginable and carried them with him. "Got any spare firewood?" he asked, his voice low and scratchy, barely above a whisper. I don't know why, but my instinct was to play it cool. I told him sure, there was some by the fire, and gestured to a small pile next to my cooler. He just stared at me, unsmiling, before he picked up a few pieces and stacked them onto my fire like he owned it. Then he sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the dirt under his nails. "Nice spot you got here," he said, still not looking away. "Yeah," I mumbled, trying to keep things light. "Good place to get some peace and quiet. Not many folks around." "Peace is what people say they're after, until they find it," he replied, poking the fire with a stick. I laughed awkwardly, wondering what he was on about. He just sat there, still, like he was waiting for something. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, I tried to steer the conversation back to normal, asking if he was camping nearby. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the flames as if he hadn't heard me. Finally, he looked up, fixing me with this unnervingly blank look. "I don't camp," he said. his voice steady, cold. "I'm just passing through, following an old path." It was at that point I started feeling like I might have made a mistake coming up here alone. This guy, whoever he was, didn't seem like someone who'd gotten lost on a weekend getaway. He felt intentional. The way he just sat there, his words dripping out slow, his gaze dark and unblinking. I cleared my throat, trying to break the spell. "Well, I'm heading out tomorrow anyway. Gotta get back to civilization, right?" I said, forcing a laugh. The man didn't blink. "You sure about that?" Now here's the thing. I was getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to look like I was afraid of him, especially when we were miles from anyone who would hear me if I yelled. Instead, I tried to play it off, leaning back in my chair and cracking another cheap joke about Bigfoot. But the man didn't laugh. He just kept staring at me, his gaze sharpening, as if he was sizing me up. Then he asked, "You ever feel like something's watching you out here?" "Not really," I lied, though by now my skin was crawling. I shrugged and took a long sip from my bottle, hoping he'd take the hint and move along. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "They come out at night, you know. The quiet ones, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. You don't see them, but they see you. They know when you're alone." I tried to keep my face neutral, though inside, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. But what was I going to do? Just get up and walk into the trees with him sitting right there? So I sat there, trapped, my mind racing, waiting for him to give up and go. Eventually, he stood up, and I felt this rush of relief until he looked down at me and said, "Careful, not everything that goes into the woods comes back out." With that, he turned and walked off, disappearing down the path toward the valley. For a few minutes, I just sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I kept telling myself that he was just some weirdo, that I'd laugh about it later. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every sound, every whisper of leaves felt like it had a purpose, like it was waiting for me to let my guard down. Sometime around midnight, I heard the noise again, louder this time. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and scanned the area. Nothing but shadows. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head, until I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone ducking behind a tree. I yelled out, "Who's there?" hoping I sounded more intimidating than I felt. No answer. I shone the flashlight in the direction where I'd seen the movement, and that's when I saw it. A small pile of sticks arranged in a circle right by the edge of my campsite, like some kind of makeshift trap or marker. And right in the center was my old pocket knife, one I'd left back in the RV. I didn't waste another second. I spun around, scrambling back to the RV as fast as I could. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and I barely managed to get the door shut before I heard footsteps crunching outside. Inside, I locked everything I could, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I peered out through one of the windows, just in time to see him standing there. In the beam of my flashlight, I dropped. He didn't even look angry, just determined. Without taking his eyes off the RV, he reached down, picked up my flashlight, and flicked it off, plunging everything into darkness. My whole body froze. I didn't know what to do, so I just waited, every nerve on edge, listening for any sound, any clue. Then, like some horror movie cliche, I heard the slow scrape of metal along the side of the RV. I don't know if it was a knife, a piece of wire, or something worse, but he dragged it slowly, deliberately, making sure I knew he was still there, waiting. I gripped my phone, fingers shaking as I tried to dial 911, but there was no signal out here. Nothing. Hours passed like that. Every now and then he'd make another sound, tapping on the window, scraping along the wall, or whispering something I couldn't quite make out. Just loud enough to keep me alert, just quiet enough to keep me guessing. Then, as dawn started to break, I finally worked up the courage to peek outside. He was gone, or at least I thought he was. The campsite was dead quiet, like he'd never been there at all. But the ground around my RV was littered with sticks, broken branches, and strange little symbols carved into the dirt. Right by my door, he'd left a note, scrawled on a scrap of bark, a final parting gift. The note was simple: not everything that goes into the woods comes back out. Remember that. I didn't waste any more time. I threw everything I could grab into the RV, fired up the engine, and got out of there without looking back. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into the Blackwater Ridge, Manila National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. "Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while." "Sure, Nate, we'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group, the one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough, well marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly, as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. "It's going to rain tomorrow," she said, almost as an afterthought. "Clear skies right now," I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was weird. I'd been in plenty of forests, but something about this one felt off. "You guys hear that?" Nate said, glancing around nervously. "Hear what?" Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. "No, it's like, I don't know, like something moving out there." I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard it too. Soft, distant, and low. A growl, almost like the sound of a heavy breath. "Coyotes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them." But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. "Maybe we should keep the fire going all night," he said. "Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us." But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper, and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. "What the hell?" Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. "This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks." I crouched down next to her. She was right. The prints were huge, human-like, but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "We should go back." The confident TJ, who could handle anything, suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. "Nah, we're fine," I said, brushing it off. "It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving." But I knew. We all knew. Something was out there, watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier, just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent, something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. "Do you hear that?" Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, closer this time. "What the hell is that?" Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. "It's just an animal," I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. But it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast, so fast I barely caught a glimpse, but I saw enough. A tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light, watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. "I'm gonna check it out." "No," Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stay here, don't be stupid." But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. "Kara," I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness, then I saw it. A tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. My name's Gregory Graham, and back in 2014, I was out in the forests around Hope Forest, Washington, in Olympic National Park, where I was set to spend a quiet weekend RV camping. I had just turned 45 and figured I could use a weekend without email, social media, or any reminders that I was getting older. A few days with the forest and the mist, all those heavy canopies of trees shutting out the world. That's what I wanted. But I'd forgotten that unplugging only means you're open to different, stranger types of connections. The first day went fine, though. I'd driven around to a nice, secluded spot in the park, pretty far from the crowds. I met a ranger in passing who gave me that look. Park rangers give when they see someone heading to an area that most people avoid. Like he wanted to warn me, but figured I knew what I was doing. Honestly, the only thing that made me feel cautious was the weather. It was overcast, and as the night started setting in, the mist turned everything darker than I'd expected. I cooked up some quick food, nothing fancy, a classic mix of canned beans and sausage, before settling in. I decided to sit outside the RV with a beer and listen to the silence, something you don't get in the city. There were sounds, sure, the wind in the trees, the occasional crackle of underbrush from some unseen creature, but it was peaceful, at least until I heard something distinctly human. It was a laugh, low and throaty, coming from somewhere in the trees, just loud enough that it couldn't be my imagination. For a minute, I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably just other campers messing around. But I couldn't shake this feeling. Something was off, and I hadn't seen anyone else around here since the ranger. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by a muttered voice I couldn't quite make out. I felt my skin prickle. Part of me wanted to go back inside, lock up the RV and forget about it. But another part of me, maybe the part that was a bit too curious, wanted to see who it was. So I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it in the direction of the sound. Nothing. Just endless trees and mist hanging thick in the air. And then, almost as if my curiosity had triggered it, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Just a flash of something pale moving through the trees. I swung the flashlight in its direction, but the light cut through only empty air and mist. I was about to turn back when the laughter came again, closer and clearer this time. It wasn't alone. There was a crunch of footsteps, heavy ones, like whoever it was wanted me to hear them. I aimed the flashlight again and caught sight of a man standing half hidden in the shadows, his face barely illuminated. He was tall, with wild, unkempt hair and a grin that stretched a little too wide. His clothes were torn, but it was his hands that caught my attention. One of them held what looked like a knife, a big, rusty hunting knife. "Hey, you mind keeping it down?" I said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. My voice cracked. He just laughed in response, tilting his head as though he was amused by my attempt to keep things normal. "Out here all by yourself?" he asked, taking a step closer. "No, actually," I lied. "Friends are just a little further up the trail." My voice sounded more confident than I felt, but the man didn't buy it. He just stood there grinning, tilting his head back and forth like he was trying to decide if he'd heard that one before. "You're lying," he said with a kind of certainty that made my stomach drop. And then he moved. Fast. Faster than I thought possible for someone who looked as disheveled as he did. I stumbled back, shining my flashlight frantically around, trying to keep him in view. But he'd vanished into the trees. I knew I should head back to the RV and lock myself in, but some part of me wanted to believe he was just a crazy local, maybe a prankster trying to give me a scare. I barely made it a few steps before I heard him again, the laughter echoing, surrounding me like it was coming from every direction. I'd lost track of him, and in that moment I realized how stupid I'd been to come out here alone, unarmed. I finally broke into a sprint back toward my RV, trying to ignore how heavy my own footsteps sounded in the silence, each crunch of leaves and snap of branches echoing back at me. As I reached the RV, I grabbed the handle, yanked it open, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut and locking it in a quick twist. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. For a few minutes it was quiet again. I kept the lights off, crouching down by the window and peeking out, looking for any sign of movement outside. But everything was still. Maybe he'd lost interest. Maybe he was just some messed up guy trying to get his kicks. I had just started to relax when I heard it, a metallic scraping right along the side of the RV. Slow. Methodical. Like someone was dragging something sharp across the metal just to let me know they were still out there. The man's voice came again, a low whisper, almost right next to the window. "You think you can hide in there, friend? You think that little door is going to keep me out?" I held my breath, fighting the urge to make a sound, hoping he'd think I was gone. But then he did something unexpected. He started laughing again, a slow, sickening chuckle that felt like it seeped through the walls of the RV. I wanted to call for help, but there was no signal out here. The reality of being completely isolated hit me hard. I heard footsteps circling the RV, a slow, mocking pace, as if he was enjoying dragging this out. Then came a thud against the door, so sudden I nearly jumped out of my skin. I clamped a hand over my mouth, pressing my back against the inside wall, feeling the tremors of each bang as he pounded against the door. "Open up, or I'll open it for you," he taunted. I scrambled for anything I could use as a weapon. All I had was a heavy flashlight, which felt pitifully inadequate against someone with a knife. But it was better than nothing. I gripped it tightly, ready to swing if he managed to get through. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the banging stopped. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, my pulse still hammering in my ears. I crept to the window, peeking out to see if he'd gone. But the fog was so thick I couldn't see past a few feet. And then, another bang, this time from the back of the RV. He was toying with me, trying to make me panic. I thought about making a run for it, but the idea of stepping outside with him lurking around made my blood run cold. I decided to wait, hoping he'd get bored and leave. But he didn't leave. The next sound I heard was worse. It was the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. My stomach dropped as I realized he'd found a spare key. Or maybe he'd had one all along. The door creaked open just a crack, and I saw his face peeking through. That same twisted grin. I didn't hesitate. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could, catching him off guard and knocking him back a few steps. He stumbled, more out of surprise than pain, and I took my chance. Bolting out of the RV and into the mist, I ran, not caring where, just away from him. I could hear his footsteps behind me, closing in fast, his laughter echoing through the trees. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept going, zigzagging through the trees, hoping to throw him off. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a clearing. My legs gave out and I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. I could still hear him, his footsteps getting closer. Slower, like he knew he had me cornered. But then, another sound. A distant voice calling my name. It was the ranger, the one I had passed earlier. Relief flooded me, and I called out, waving my arms frantically. The ranger appeared, his flashlight cutting through the mist, and he stopped short when he saw my face. He didn't ask any questions, just grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. Together, we made our way back through the forest, the ranger glancing over his shoulder every few steps. When we reached the safety of the main trail, he radioed for backup, keeping his voice low as if he didn't want to alert the man who'd been following me. Later, I learned that the man had been spotted in the area before, rumored to be an escaped convict who'd taken refuge in the forest, surviving off whatever he could find, or whoever he could find. The ranger explained that they'd found evidence of his camps scattered throughout the park, along with remnants of clothing, food cans, and other more disturbing items. A handful of bones, scattered and half buried. It was enough proof to close the trails, to warn campers that sometimes the wilderness holds more than just trees and streams. It holds people like him, waiting for someone foolish enough to wander alone. The authorities never caught him, and the trail remained closed for months. I knew, logically, I was safe. But I could still remember that laughter, that look in his eye. The ranger told me he'd seen men like him before, men who'd turned the wilderness into a hunting ground. Guess he thought you were next on the list? The ranger said with a wry smile. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, Slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well, but now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. Jack. The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. Jack, help me. I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? No answer. Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time, clearer, like the static was peeling away. Jack, why didn't you come back? I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. Get a grip, Slick, I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog. It was all getting to me. That's what it had to be, just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road, where the cliffs drop down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog, but these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. Jack. The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Stop it, I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. You're not real. But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown. The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea. And now here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear. Come back, Jack. The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo, it was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences, moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them, I saw Dave, his eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. You left me. His voice echoed in my head. You left me to die. I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. I'm sorry, I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you. Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet, but the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet. And neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. My name's Jack Bennett, and this all went down back in 2014 at a place called Elephant Butte in New Mexico. I'd been doing this RV thing for a couple of years, figuring I'd see the best of the American landscape. I'd say my approach was unconventional, but hey, so was I. I'd always believed that if you parked right and kept your wits about you, nothing bad would happen out in the desert. I used to laugh off the warnings from locals, thinking the scariest thing I'd encounter was a coyote trying to get into my food stash. My camping spot was ideal, at least to me. Elephant Butte had this rugged charm, with canyons etched by time and a lake that felt almost alien. I found a spot just above a dried-up riverbed, not too close to anyone else, but within a quick walk to some other RVs. The stars were out, the air was cool, and I was just settling into my second beer of the evening, thinking about what part of the lake I'd explore in the morning. That's when I saw him. Or rather, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing just past my firelight. At first, I thought maybe he was lost, another camper who'd maybe had one too many and was wandering around looking for a bathroom. I gave him a wave, expecting a nod back or even some awkward apology for intruding, but he didn't move. Just stood there, swaying a little, his arms hanging limp by his sides. Now, I'm not the type to get jumpy, but something about the way he just loomed there set me on edge. I called out, asking if he was lost, but he didn't answer. Just took a step closer into the faint glow of the firelight, and I finally got a better look. He had on a dark hoodie that looked like it had been dragged through the dirt, and his jeans were torn up pretty bad. Not in a fashion statement way, either. The guy was thin, gaunt even, and his face was all wrong, like he'd spent too much time out in the sun. His skin was rough and leathery, almost cracked. That's when I noticed his hands. They were clenched into fists, but the fingers were bent at weird angles, almost like they'd been broken and left to heal on their own. I didn't know what his deal was, but I knew I didn't want him coming any closer. I stepped back toward my RV casually, like I wasn't trying to show him he was creeping me out. I made some joke about the desert being a strange place for a midnight stroll, but again, he didn't react. Just as I was about to turn and head inside, he finally spoke, his voice dry and cracked like he hadn't used it in weeks. He mumbled something so quiet I could barely catch it, but the words sounded like, "Do you have water?" He took another step closer, his feet scraping against the rocky ground. Now, I'm not heartless. If someone's in need, I'd help them out. But everything about him felt off, like he was one of those wild-eyed people you sometimes see in cities, someone unhinged and just barely holding it together. I told him to wait by the fire, that I'd grab him some water. But as I turned to step up into my RV, I heard his footsteps follow me. They were slow and deliberate, as if he was mimicking my movements, each step a beat behind mine. I paused, turned around, and there he was, close enough that I could smell this strange, sour odor coming off him, like he'd been living in the wild for too long. I held up a hand firmly, telling him to stop. But he just kept advancing, his eyes fixated on me like he decided I was his only lifeline. I don't know what got into me, but I shouted, loud and sharp, hoping it would snap him out of whatever strange trance he was in. For a split second, he seemed to hesitate, his eyes darting around like he was trying to process where he was. Then he dropped his arms, gave me a weird, twisted smile, and turned back toward the darkness, shuffling off without another word. I watched him until he melted into the shadows, his figure swallowed up by the night. Relieved, I went inside, bolting the door and double-checking all the locks. I thought that would be the end of it. Figured maybe he was just some drifter or someone strung out on something. But a couple of hours later, just as I was dozing off, I heard it, this soft scratching at the window. It was faint, like he was testing to see if I was awake. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the wind, but then it turned into a low thud, steady, like he was hitting his fist against the glass, over and over. My mind raced. I thought about grabbing something to defend myself, but the only thing I had that even remotely resembled a weapon was a rusty pocket knife that would probably snap in half if I tried to use it. Instead, I stood still, heart pounding, listening to that rhythmic thumping. It stopped after a minute, followed by silence so deep it was deafening. After what felt like forever, I heard footsteps shuffling away, and I finally allowed myself to exhale. The relief didn't last long, though, because the next morning, just as the sun was coming up, I found footprints around my RV, looping back and forth, circling the whole vehicle like he'd been pacing there for hours. They led off toward the lake, and I told myself maybe he'd finally wandered off for good. But around noon, I saw him again, standing by the water's edge, staring out like he was waiting for something. I kept my distance, watching him from inside, not wanting him to know I noticed. Hours passed, and he didn't move, not even when other campers walked by. They didn't seem to see him, like he was some mirage that only I could see. That night, the sound started again, this time louder, the knocking, scratching, scraping. It was relentless, like he was trying to dig his way inside. I barely slept, my nerves shot, and by dawn I'd had enough. I figured I'd pack up, leave Elephant Boot behind, and maybe send a warning to the rangers about some unhinged guy lurking around. Just as I started up the RV, I saw him, standing dead center in the path that led out of the campsite. He stood there, arms hanging at his sides, his head cocked to one side, watching as if he knew exactly what I was trying to do. I felt a flash of anger, my fear momentarily replaced by frustration. I shouted at him, telling him to get out of the way, but he just stared, his cracked lips pulling into that same twisted smile. I didn't know what else to do, so I drove forward slowly, hoping he'd move. Instead, he stepped to the side, watching me as I passed, his gaze locked on me like he was trying to memorize my face. As I finally pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone else standing there beside him. A shadowy figure, just as ragged, just as empty. I didn't stop until I hit the next town, where I told the local sheriff about the strange man at Elephant Butt. He listened, though I could tell he was skeptical, probably chalking it up to a camper's wild imagination. But then his face changed when I mentioned the guy's twisted, broken fingers. The sheriff told me in a low, almost hesitant tone that they'd had reports of a man who fit that description years ago, a drifter they'd found dead out by the lake. They said he'd broken his hands trying to dig his way out of some kind of improvised grave. As I drove away from the station, the sheriff's words echoed in my mind, filling me with a cold dread that settled deep in my bones. I don't know if what I saw was real, if maybe there was some other drifter out there with a strange fixation on me, or if I'd somehow crossed paths with the ghost of a man who never found peace. All I know is I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I kept driving, the sun setting on the horizon, and every so often I glanced in my mirrors, half expecting to see that twisted smile staring back at me from the road. But there was nothing, just the open stretch of highway and the fading light, leaving Elephant Boot far behind. My name's Nathan Matthews, and back in 2019, I decided to take a week off from everything and go RV camping in Banff National Park up in Alberta. Figured a bit of wilderness, some long hikes, and quiet nights around the fire were just what I needed after busting my back for months on a client project. I'm not what you'd call an outdoorsman or any of that, but a guy's got to recharge somehow, right? So there I was, 3 days in, sitting by my RV parked off one of the smaller trailheads away from the usual tourist buzz. It was past dark, maybe close to midnight, and I was nursing the last beer I packed for the trip. The world was quiet, just the sound of the wind through the trees and an owl or two hooting off somewhere. Felt pretty good to be alone. Just me and a couple of old camping chairs. No city noise, no phone buzzing every 5 minutes, but in a way that quiet also gets to you. Anyway, I was just about to call it a night when I heard some footsteps crunching on the gravel about 50 yards out. Now that was odd because I hadn't seen a soul all day. Whoever it was, they weren't using a flashlight either, just trudging along slow and steady through the dark. And the steps, well, they sounded off. Not like a jogger or even someone out for a late night stroll. They were deliberate, dragging almost. Made me think of those horror movies where the killer's just ambling along while everyone else is running for their lives. So I called out, "Hey there, need any help?" Thinking it was probably some lost hiker or maybe a park ranger making rounds. No response. The footsteps paused, then started again, coming closer this time. I got a weird chill, the kind that runs up your spine when you know something's not quite right. By then, I was up on my feet, holding my half-crushed beer can like it was a weapon. I thought, okay, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just some weirdo who doesn't want to talk. But then he stepped into the edge of the firelight. He was tall, thin as a rail, with a wild mop of hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in weeks. He wore a ratty old trench coat that hung off him like it had been made for someone twice his size. I don't know why, but his hands were what I noticed most. Big, bony, and scarred up like he tried to punch through a thorn bush. And his face, he was grinning, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of grin that said he knew something I didn't. "Nice night for camping," he said, his voice low and almost too smooth. He looked around as if admiring the trees or the fire. "Yeah, it is," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here this late." "Me neither," he said, still grinning. "Guess we're both full of surprises." There was something so off about the way he said it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but everything in me was screaming that I needed to be somewhere else. I tried to keep it casual, asked if he needed anything or if he was lost, but he didn't answer. Just kept grinning and staring like he was sizing me up for, well, I don't know what. I took a slow step back, trying to put some distance between us. "Well, it's getting late," I said. I was about to head in for the night. He shrugged, then looked down at my fire. "You mind if I warm up a bit first? Nights can get real cold out here, especially when you're alone." There it was, the way he said, "alone." I didn't like it. Not one bit. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want him to see I was spooked. I forced a smile, gestured to the fire, and told him to make himself at home. All I wanted was to get back to the RV, lock the door, and maybe, just maybe, call someone. Not that I had any service, but you know, a guy can hope. As he sat down, he reached into his coat and pulled out a knife. It was long, with a serrated edge that caught the light just right. He started whittling at a stick he picked up, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I kept an eye on him, pretending to fuss around with my gear. "You out here by yourself?" he asked, not looking up from his stick. "Yeah," I lied. "A couple of buddies were supposed to join, but they bailed last minute." He nodded, still grinning. "Shame. It's dangerous out here, you know. Lots of accidents happen in these parts. People get lost, hurt. Some of them never make it back." I swallowed, feeling my mouth go dry. "I'll keep that in mind." He laughed, a short, dry sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, I bet you will." At that point, every instinct I had was yelling at me to run, to get out of there. But he was between me and the RV, and I didn't want to make any sudden moves. I decided to play it cool, inching my way toward the RV door little by little. And then, just like that, he stopped carving, dropped the stick, and looked right at me. "You know, I've been waiting a long time for someone like you to come along. Someone who looks like they got something worth losing." He said it so calmly, so matter-of-fact, that for a second I thought he was joking. But then, he stood up, that knife glinting in his hand, and started toward me, slow and steady. I didn't even think. I bolted, making a mad dash for the RV, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. I could hear him behind me laughing, this low, awful laugh, as he came after me. I got to the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut, just as he reached the steps. For a second, I thought I was safe. But then I heard the scrape of metal against the door, and his voice, low and too damn close. "You really think a door is going to stop me, Nathan?" The fact that he knew my name sent a fresh wave of terror through me. How did he know? I hadn't told him, and he definitely wasn't someone I recognized. I backed away, looking around for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. There was a little hatchet I'd brought for chopping wood, so I grabbed it and braced myself, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He started banging on the door, first with his fists, then with the knife. The whole RV shook, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he found a way in. I could hear him talking, muttering about all the fun we were going to have and how long he'd been waiting for this moment. And then, silence. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just the sound of my own heartbeat and the wind outside. Maybe he'd given up, maybe he'd decided to move on to some other poor soul. But I wasn't about to take any chances. I decided to sneak a look through the window just to make sure. Bad idea. The moment I peeked out, he lunged, slamming his face against the glass, grinning that same awful grin. His nose was bleeding, his lips split, but he didn't seem to care. He just stared at me, eyes wide and wild, pressing the knife to the glass like he was daring me to come outside. "You can't hide forever, Nathan," he whispered, his voice muffled but clear. "I'll be right here, waiting." I backed away, too stunned to even scream, and sat down on the floor, clutching that hatchet and praying he'd lose interest. Hours passed, and he just kept pacing outside, tapping that knife against the RV, muttering to himself. Sometimes laughing, sometimes cursing. I stayed awake all night, every muscle tensed, just waiting for him to make his move. But he never did. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, he was gone. Just gone. I crept outside, half expecting him to jump out from behind a tree or something, but all I found was that stick he'd been carving, now finished and sharpened to a deadly point. I got in the RV, drove out of there as fast as I could, and reported it all to the park rangers. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They probably thought I'd been spooked by some prankster, or maybe had one too many beers. But I know what I saw. I know he was real. Weeks later, I did some digging, trying to find out if anyone else had seen him. Turns out I wasn't the first. Over the years, a few other campers had reported a strange man lurking in the woods. A man with a knife, and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. They called him the Grinner. Some said he was just a rumor, an old ghost story people told around the campfire, but I know better, because somewhere out there, he's still lurking, waiting for his next camping trip. Night RV camping just outside the Sierra Nevada mountains, not too far from Mono Lake. Now, I wouldn't call myself an outdoorsman by any stretch of the imagination. Honestly, I was more of a stay inside, sip on something warm kind of guy. But a divorce and a midlife crisis will drive you to some weird places. After a decade of city noise, I figured a solo RV trip into the mountains might clear my head. Turns out that kind of peace and quiet isn't always as comforting as you'd think. I'd parked my RV at one of those smaller, secluded campsites where you're more likely to find deer than people, which was kind of the point. The first couple of nights were uneventful, just me, a few beers, and some bad attempts at cooking over a campfire. I'd been telling myself it was the perfect kind of escape, though I'll admit that by night 3, the isolation had started to feel a little less peaceful and more claustrophobic. But what was I going to do? Pack up and head back to the city? Nah, that would have felt like losing. Plus, I was still trying to get used to sleeping in an RV without the constant hum of city life around me. Everything out there was too still. Every tiny crack in the forest made my skin crawl. But hey, what's a little discomfort compared to proving to myself I wasn't totally losing my edge at 42? That night, as I was lying on the RV bed, scrolling through some half-downloaded articles on my phone, I noticed the light outside flicker. Not a campfire glow, something sharper, more precise. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, maybe a reflection of something metallic in the distance. But it happened again, this time closer. I sat up, listening. I wasn't one of those paranoid types, but when you're out alone in the mountains, your mind has a way of turning normal things into, well, not so normal things. For a while, nothing happened. The wind rustled the leaves, an owl hooted off in the distance, the kind of noises you should expect in the middle of nowhere. Then, just as I was about to let it go and settle back into my semi-uncomfortable RV bed, there was a sound. Not the wind, not some critter scurrying about. This was the distinct crunch of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the trees just beyond my RV. There were no major spelling errors, but I made a few minor punctuation and clarity tweaks for smoothness. I grabbed my flashlight, hesitating before I opened the RV door. There wasn't much else I could do. I didn't own a gun, never really saw the need in the city, and honestly, I'd thought the RV would provide enough protection from whatever the woods had to offer. You know, deer, maybe a curious bear or something, not a strange man lurking outside. The moment I stepped outside, the figure bolted fast. I shined my flashlight in the direction they ran, catching a glimpse of a dirty face, long stringy hair, and something like a wild grin flashing in the dark. But before I could process it, they were gone, disappearing into the thick trees. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that maybe it was just some vagrant who didn't want trouble, but when I got back inside, something had changed. The flashlight beam caught a reflection on the passenger seat of my RV. My heart sank when I saw it. A large hunting knife jammed into the seat. It wasn't mine. Now I know what you're thinking. How could I have missed someone sneaking into my RV? I couldn't tell you. Maybe I had dozed off earlier, or maybe this guy was just good at what he did. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't alone, and whoever this guy was, he had keys. I fumbled for my phone, planning to call the Rangers, but of course, out here, there was no signal. So, like any rational person, I locked every door and window, grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I had, a camping hatchet, and sat in the driver's seat, keeping an eye on the tree line. I wasn't planning on staying the night anymore. First light, I was getting the hell out of there, but first light didn't come fast enough. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion overriding my adrenaline, because the next thing I knew, it was around 2 a.m., and the entire RV shook. It wasn't a tree falling or some kind of animal bumping into it. It was deliberate, like someone was trying to force their way in. I jumped up, clutching the hatchet, and shouted out, hoping to scare them off, but the pounding didn't stop. When the door finally flew open, it wasn't subtle. The figure from earlier barreled in, wild and grinning, holding a crowbar. There was no conversation, no demands. He lunged at me. I also made small adjustments for flow and clarity where it felt natural. I won't bore you with the gory details, but let's just say it wasn't one of those quick, clean self-defense moments you see in the movies. I got some good hits in, but not before he bashed me pretty good with the crowbar. Blood was everywhere. His, mine. It all blended together in the chaos. At some point, we both fell out of the RV and the fight spilled onto the ground. I don't know how, but I got the upper hand, slamming the hatchet down into his chest. The fight stopped then, just like that. I remember standing over him, gasping for air, not really registering what had happened until I saw the light dimming in his wild eyes. He was gone. I staggered back into the RV, dazed, bloody, and in shock. I locked myself inside, not knowing what else to do. Calling for help wasn't an option out here, so I waited. Just me, the dead guy outside in the silence of the forest. By the time morning rolled around, I was still wide awake, eyes fixed on the body outside. I don't know why I hadn't moved it. Maybe I just needed the daylight to confirm it wasn't some sick nightmare. Eventually, I stepped out, the crisp mountain air biting at my face. I searched the man's pockets, half expecting to find nothing, but there it was. His wallet. His name was Warren Gibson. He was wanted in 3 states for murder, and here I was, alone with his body, no cell service, and a whole mess of questions I didn't have the answers to. The cops eventually found me that afternoon after a couple of hikers came across my bloodied RV and freaked out. They took one look at me, the body, and started asking the usual questions. I don't even remember half of what I told them, just that it was self-defense, which, to be fair, was the truth. Turns out Warren had been squatting in the mountains for years, preying on isolated campers. They'd been looking for him for a long time. Funny thing is, I'd planned this trip to escape the chaos of the city, to find some peace and quiet. My name is Michael Lopez. I'm 31 years old, and up until last week, I prided myself on being fearless. I've explored abandoned hospitals, trekked through deserts, and even camped alone in bear country. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Goose Lake. I still don't know if I'm lucky to have escaped or cursed because I went there in the first place. It all started with a tip from one of my subscribers. I'm a travel blogger, and my channel focuses on exploring offbeat places, especially ones with creepy or mysterious reputations. A viewer messaged me about Goose Lake, a small body of water tucked away near Clinton, Iowa, and its supposed haunting by the drowned maiden. According to local legend, a woman named Mary Abbott drowned there in the late 1800s under suspicious circumstances. Some say she was killed by a jealous lover, others claim she lures people to their deaths. It sounded perfect for my next video. I arrived at Goose Lake on a chilly October afternoon. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the water, still and dark, mirrored the overcast sky. The place was eerily beautiful, exactly the kind of location my audience loved. The first person I met was a fisherman named Nathan. He was pulling his boat up onto the shore as I parked my RV. "You camping here?" he asked, squinting at me like I just told him I planned to swim with sharks. "Yeah, just for the night," I said, grabbing my camera gear. "I heard there's some cool history here." Nathan snorted. "History, sure, but not the kind you want to mess with." He told me about Mary Abbott's ghost, how people claim to hear her crying or calling their names at night. "If you're smart, you'll leave before sunset," he added, shaking his head. I laughed it off. I've heard plenty of spooky stories over the years, and none of them ever scared me off. Besides, I had a video to make. Let me know if you'd like it formatted differently, turned into a script, or continued. Though it was already very clean, only a couple of minor tweaks were needed, mostly stylistic consistency. I spent the afternoon exploring the lake's edge, filming the dense woods and the water's inky surface. It was peaceful enough, at least at first, but as I was flying my drone over the lake, it suddenly veered off course and crashed into the water. "Damn it," I muttered, wading in to retrieve it. The water was icy cold, and as I pulled the drone out, I glanced down at the surface. That's when I saw it, a fleeting reflection of a pale, distorted face staring up at me. I froze, my heart pounding, but when I looked again, the reflection was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, I was primed to see something spooky, wasn't I? Back in the RV, I checked the footage from the drone. Most of it was fine until the last few seconds. That's where the camera captured a faint figure standing at the edge of the lake. It was too far away to make out details, but it sent a chill down my spine. As darkness fell, the lake took on an oppressive silence. No frogs croaking, no crickets chirping, just the sound of my own breathing. I cooked a quick dinner on the tiny RV stove, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard it, a soft knock on the RV door. My stomach twisted. Who could be out here at this hour? I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. No one was there. I stepped outside, scanning the area. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground. Wet footprints leading from the water to my RV. They were small, like a child's, and they ended abruptly at the door. A shiver ran down my spine, and I bolted back inside, locking the door behind me. By morning, the eerie events felt almost— "It's not a ghost," Laura said sharply. "It's a spirit, a creature. The Wendigo appears when something's wrong, when the land's been disrespected or people have gone too far. It preys on greed and hunger." I laughed, trying to ease the tension. "Well, good thing we're not greedy." Laura didn't laugh. She looked at me, then at Chris. "Be careful. Things can change quickly out here." Her warning lingered as we hiked deeper into the forest. Chris was unusually quiet, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. I tried to shake off my unease, focusing on setting up new motion sensor cameras. But as I reviewed the footage, the images disturbed me. The cameras had captured blurry shapes, elongated, humanoid figures skirting the edges of the frame. I didn't tell Chris, he was already on edge. That night, the forest came alive with sounds, faint growls, snapping twigs, and something that sounded like breathing. I stayed by the fire, gripping my flashlight while Chris sat rigid beside me. "I heard it," he whispered. "Tell me you heard it." "I heard it," I admitted. "Stay close." At some point, Chris stood abruptly. "I'm going to the RV." "No way," I said. "It's too far," but he was already walking into the darkness. I chased after him, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. "Chris, stop!" He turned, his face pale. "Didn't you hear her?" Laura's voice. "She's calling for help." I stared at him. "Chris, Laura's not here." But he wasn't listening. He kept moving faster now until I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "Listen to me!" I shouted. "You're not thinking clearly." Chris looked at me confused, as if waking from a dream. I thought I heard." The growling returned, closer this time. The foul stench of decay filled the air, making my stomach churn. Something moved in the shadows, too fast to see. "Run," I whispered. We sprinted back to camp, but the fire had died. The woods pressed in around us, suffocating and silent. Then came the mimicry. "Chris," a voice called identical to mine. He froze, staring into the trees. "Evan? What? "It's not me," I hissed. "Don't listen to it." The voice came again, closer. "Chris, help me." Chris grabbed my arm, his face white with fear. "What is that?" The answer came with the snap of branches. A figure stepped into the clearing. A gaunt, elongated humanoid with glowing eyes and claws that gleamed in the faint moonlight. The smell of rot was overwhelming. It was the Wendigo. I shoved Chris toward the trail. "Run! Don't stop!" The Wendigo moved with unnatural speed, circling us. Its glowing eyes locked on Chris. It growled, a guttural, bone-chilling sound. Chris tripped, falling hard, and I turned back, swinging my flashlight wildly. The light caught the creature's face, twisted and skeletal, its lips curling back to reveal jagged teeth. It flinched, momentarily blinded, and I used the distraction to drag Chris to his feet. We stumbled through the forest, the Wendigo's footsteps echoing behind us. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we had to keep moving. We found Laura at the edge of the forest. She had a torch in one hand and a look of grim determination on her face. "It's here, isn't it?" she said. I nodded, gasping for breath. "What do we do?" "Fire," she said. "It's the only thing that weakens it." Chris was shaking, his face pale. "We're going to die out here." "No, we're not," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We fight." Laura handed me a torch, lighting it with hers. The Wendigo emerged moments later, its movements jerky and unnatural. It circled us, growling, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "Hold your ground," Laura said. "Don't let it separate us." The creature lunged. Faster than I could react, Laura swung her torch. The flames grazed its side and it screeched, recoiling. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. Chris panicked, dropping his torch and bolting into the woods. "Chris, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. The Wendigo turned, chasing after him. "Stay here," I told Laura, running after my friend. I found Chris slumped against a tree, his breathing shallow. The Wendigo stood over him, its claws poised. I didn't think. I just acted, swinging my torch with all my strength. The flames caught its arm and it howled, retreating into the shadows. Chris looked up at me, his eyes glassy. "Evan," he whispered. "It's inside my head. I can't stop it." "You're fine," I said, pulling him to his feet. "We're getting out of here." We made it back to Laura, but Chris wasn't the same. He muttered incoherently, his eyes darting around like he was seeing things I couldn't. "We have to go," Laura said. "Now." The three of us ran, the Wendigo's growls following us all the way to the RV. When we finally reached it, I shoved Chris inside and slammed the door. Laura and I collapsed, exhausted, but something felt wrong. Chris was silent, sitting in the corner, his head bowed. I approached cautiously. "Chris?" I said. He looked up, smiling, a cold, unnatural smile. "You can't escape," he said, his voice distorted. The Wendigo's reflection gleamed in his eyes. We drove away, leaving the gorge behind, but the claw marks on the RV side were a stark reminder of what we'd faced. Chris didn't speak again. His smile was frozen, his eyes distant. As we crossed the state line, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The Wendigo stood at the edge of the forest, watching us. We survived, but I'll never go back. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. And flow while keeping your original tone and structure intact. I'd been driving for hours, the narrow desert highway stretching endlessly in front of me. The sun was a golden orb sinking behind the mesas, painting the sky in fiery hues. My RV rattled as the pavement turned to dirt, the road leading me deeper into the vast, silent expanse of Canyon Hollow. This was where I wanted to be, alone, surrounded by nothing but red rock and the occasional shriek of a hawk. I needed to clear my head, to find some kind of peace, or at least a distraction. 6 months had passed since the accident, but the guilt was as raw as ever. I should have been more careful. I couldn't escape that thought, no matter how far I drove. Canyon Hollow was famous for its petroglyphs, remnants of an ancient people whose art told stories of life, death, and something in between. It was also infamous for its mysteries, tales of settlers who vanished, of travelers who never made it out. But I didn't believe in that sort of thing. History was history, nothing more. I pulled into the campground as dusk settled, parking near the edge of the canyon. There were only 2 other campers, an older couple in a beat-up RV several spots down. They waved as I stepped out, and I gave them a nod. The silence of the desert was almost unnerving, the kind of quiet that pressed on your ears. I shook it off and set up camp, promising myself a good night's rest before exploring the next day. That first night, I dreamed of the accident. I was back on the ridge, the rocks crumbling beneath my feet. I heard Alex shouting, his voice raw with panic. My hands reached out for him, but I wasn't fast enough. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight. The silence outside was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the RV as it settled into the cool desert air. I stepped outside for some fresh air. The moon hung high, casting long shadows over the red rocks. I could see the older couple's RV, their lights off. Beyond them, the canyon stretched out, an ocean of darkness. That's when I heard it, a faint voice carried on the wind. Ethan. I froze, my heart pounding. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was Alex's. Impossible, I told myself. Just a trick of the wind. I stood there for a moment, staring into the void before retreating to the safety of the RV. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. The sun was bright, and the desert looked almost friendly in the daylight. I packed a bag with water and snacks and set off to explore the petroglyphs. The trail was rugged, winding through narrow canyons and open plains dotted with junipers. The carvings appeared in clusters, etched into the stone with astonishing precision. Animals, spirals, figures locked in what looked like dances or battles. Then I found the symbol. When I got back to camp, the older couple's RV was gone. At first, I thought they'd left while I was out, but their spot was wrong. Their folding chairs were still there, along with a cooler and a half-empty coffee mug. Their fire pit had ashes that were still warm. I walked over, calling out, but no one answered. The RV keys were sitting on the folding table as if they'd just stepped away for a moment. A heavy unease settled over me, but I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they'd gone for a hike. Maybe they'd gotten a ride into town. But as night fell, the unease turned into something closer to fear. The wind picked up after sundown, howling through the canyon like a living thing. I sat inside the RV, trying to focus on anything but the emptiness outside. That's when I noticed the journal. It was sitting on my passenger seat, leather-bound and worn. I hadn't seen it there before. My pulse quickened as I flipped it open. The handwriting was shaky but legible, the entries chronicling the travels of someone who had camped here before me. At first, the notes were mundane, descriptions of the canyon, complaints about the heat, but as the entries went on, they grew darker. Something is out there. I see shadows at night, faces in the mirrors. I thought I was alone, but I'm not. They're watching me. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. Don't let them in. No matter what you hear, don't let them in. I snapped the journal shut, my hands trembling. The RV groaned as the wind buffeted it, and for a moment I thought I heard a knock at the door. Just the wind, I told myself. But then it came again, louder. Hello? I called, my voice shaking. No answer. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The desert stretched out before me, empty and silent. But then I saw them, footprints in the dirt, leading from the ridge down to my RV. My stomach turned. That night, I barricaded the door with everything I could find. Sleep was out of the question. The whispers started around midnight, faint at first, then louder. They called my name, voices I recognized but couldn't place. Alex was one of them. I covered my ears, rocking back and forth until the sun came up. Let me know if you'd like help formatting this into a short story or adding to it. Relief flooding me when it roared to life. But as I drove toward the exit, the road twisted and looped, always bringing me back to the campground. I tried every direction, but it was no use. It was like the canyon wouldn't let me go. Desperation drove me back to the petroglyphs. I followed the spirals, hoping they held some kind of answer. The silence was crushing now, the air heavy with dread. And then I saw it, a wagon train, fully intact, crossing the canyon in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mirage, but as I got closer, the figures became clearer. Men, women, and children in 19th century clothing. Their faces were pale, their movements slow and deliberate. I shouted, waving my arms, but they didn't react. As I approached, they vanished, leaving only skeletal remains of wagons and rusted tools in their wake. That night, they came for me. I sat in the RV, knife in hand, as shadows moved outside. The voices were louder now, pleading and accusing all at once. "Why did you leave me, Ethan?" Alex's voice cut through the din, filled with anger and sorrow. The windows fogged as hollow faces pressed against the glass, their empty eye sockets weeping black tears. They began to bang on the walls, the door shaking on its hinges. "You can't hide," they whispered. "You belong here with us." I thought of the journal, of its warning not to let them in. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with guilt and regret. I clutched the knife, my knuckles white. Then I remembered the spirals. The petroglyphs had to mean something. A way out, a key. I grabbed Alex's compass, the only keepsake I had of him, and bolted from the RV. The shadows followed, their whispers echoing through the canyon. I reached the spirals and fell to my knees, holding the compass above the carvings. "I'm sorry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, Alex." The air grew still. The shadows stopped moving. One by one, they dissolved into the canyon mist, their voices fading into silence. The compass grew warm in my hand before falling still. Turn into the kind of nightmare that keeps you awake at night, staring into shadows. But that's exactly what happened last October at Yellow River State Forest in Iowa. I'm telling you this because I want someone to believe me, because I'm not sure I even believe myself anymore. It started as an innocent plan. I was the one who suggested the trip, desperate to reconnect with my old high school friends after years apart. Tommy Vance, always the sarcastic skeptic, was the first to agree. He figured it would be fun to debunk every scary story we might tell around the fire. Lena Ruiz, the heart of our group, jumped at the idea too. She'd been burning out in her corporate job and needed a break. And then there was Daryl Miller, our wild card, who wouldn't miss an excuse to stir up trouble. We piled into Daryl's beat-up RV on a crisp Friday morning, the kind of day that smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke. The drive to Yellow River was filled with laughter and teasing, but the moment we parked at the remote campsite, something felt off. The campsite was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds sang, no crickets chirped. "This is nature's version of airplane mode," Tommy joked as we set up camp. The generator in the RV sputtered once and died, leaving us with flashlights and a campfire for light. We didn't care at first, we were here to rough it after all. As the night settled in, a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it a faint whispering sound. Lena was the first to notice. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Tommy replied, smirking. "Voices, in the wind." Tommy rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, don't start with the ghost stories already." But I heard it too, a faint, almost melodic sound like distant voices murmuring. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks. When we turned in for the night, things got stranger. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside the RV. They were slow, deliberate, circling the vehicle. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through the window, but there was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the moonlight. I didn't sleep much after that. Let me know if you need any more help. Lighter. "You guys messing with me?" he asked, half joking. None of us admitted to it, and a weird tension settled over breakfast. We decided to hike one of the trails, hoping some fresh air would shake the unease. The forest felt even quieter than before, like it was holding its breath. Halfway through the hike, we came across a strange sight. Claw marks gouged deep into the trunk of a tree. "Cougar, maybe," I suggested, though the marks were too high up. Lena ran her fingers over the grooves, her face pale. "These aren't from an animal," she said softly. Tommy snorted. "Don't tell me Bigfoot's out here too." But his humor didn't last long. As we continued, we found more signs. Animal bones arranged in strange patterns, feathers soaked in something dark and sticky. Even Tommy couldn't joke about that. That evening, back at camp, the wind returned, stronger now, and with it, the whispers. We huddled around the fire, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. Then Lena froze, staring into the darkness. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" I asked. There was something watching us. We all looked, but the firelight didn't reach far enough into the trees. Tommy laughed nervously. "Just your imagination," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The wind howled louder that night, and the whispers turned into something more sinister. Laughter, faint and mocking. I lay awake in my sleeping bag, every muscle in my body tense. Around 3 a.m., Lena's voice jolted me upright. "David, help me." It was coming from the woods. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted out of the RV, only to find Lena sitting by the dying embers of the fire. She looked at me, confused. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I heard you calling for me," I said, my heart racing. She shook her head. I didn't say anything. Daryl, who had been snoring moments ago, groggily joined us. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, a piercing scream echoed through the forest. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something in between, a sound that froze my blood and sent us all scrambling back into the RV. Let me know if you need any further adjustments. By morning, Daryl was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his boots and jacket missing. We found claw marks on the RV door along with bloody smears. Maybe he went for a walk and got lost, Tommy suggested, though his voice shook. He wouldn't leave without telling us, I said. Lena was silent, her eyes darting nervously to the tree line. "It took him," she finally whispered. "Whatever's out there, it took him." We searched the area, calling Daryl's name, but all we found was his lighter lying in the dirt. By nightfall, we were trapped. The RV was our only sanctuary, but the generator was dead, and the thing outside was growing bolder. It mimicked our voices, calling out to us in the dark. Once I swore I heard my own voice laughing maniacally. Then we saw it. A tall, gaunt figure stood at the edge of the firelight, its glowing eyes fixed on us. It moved unnaturally, jerking like a puppet on strings. Tommy grabbed a makeshift weapon, a heavy wrench, and stood by the door. "We're not dying here," he said. But the thing didn't attack. It just watched, its head tilting at odd angles. Then, in a voice that sounded like Daryl's, it said, "Come out and play." Lena screamed, and Tommy slammed the door shut. I knew we couldn't stay. The creature was toying with us, and it was only a matter of time before it grew tired of the game. Lena, trembling, suggested a protective circle. "My grandmother used salt for protection," she said. We poured the salt from our supplies around the RV, praying it would work. The creature paced just beyond the line, its glowing eyes filled with malice. At dawn, we made our move, grabbing only the essentials. We fled the campsite, running blindly through the woods until we found a ranger station. The rangers didn't believe our story, of course. They said Daryl was likely lost and promised to send a search party. But they never found him. It's been months since that trip, and I still hear the whispers in my dreams. Sometimes I think I see Daryl's face in the shadows, grinning at me with glowing eyes. Whatever that thing was, it's not done with us. And I don't think it ever will be. The content flows well, and the spelling is consistent throughout. Let me know if you need any other adjustments. My name's James Harris. It was 2008, and I was on my third night RV camping just outside the Sierra Nevada mountains, not too far from Mono Lake. Now, I wouldn't call myself an outdoorsman by any stretch of the imagination. Honestly, I was more of a stay inside, sip on something warm kind of guy. But a divorce and a midlife crisis will drive you to some weird places. After a decade of city noise, I figured a solo RV trip into the mountains might clear my head. Turns out that kind of peace and quiet isn't always as comforting as you'd think. I'd parked my RV at one of those smaller, secluded campsites where you're more likely to find deer than people, which was kind of the point. The first couple of nights were uneventful, just me, a few beers, and some bad attempts at cooking over a campfire. I'd been telling myself it was the perfect kind of escape, though I'll admit that by night 3, the isolation had started to feel a little less peaceful and more claustrophobic. But what was I going to do? Pack up and head back to the city? Nah, that would have felt like losing. Plus, I was still trying to get used to sleeping in an RV without the constant hum of city life around me. Everything out there was too still. Every tiny crack in the forest made my skin crawl. But hey, what's a little discomfort compared to proving to myself I wasn't totally losing my edge at 42? That night, as I was lying on the RV bed, scrolling through some half-downloaded articles on my phone, I noticed the light outside flicker. Not a campfire glow, something sharper, more precise. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, maybe a reflection of something metallic in the distance. But it happened again, this time closer. I sat up, listening. I wasn't one of those paranoid types, but when you're out alone in the mountains, your mind has a way of turning normal things into, well, not so normal things. For a while, nothing happened. The wind rustled the leaves, an owl hooted off in the distance, the kind of noises you should expect in the middle of nowhere. Then, just as I was about to let it go and settle back into my semi-uncomfortable RV bed, there was a sound. Not the wind, not some critter scurrying about. This was the distinct crunch of footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the trees just beyond my RV. I slid out of bed and peered out the tiny RV window. At first, I didn't see anything, just the pitch-black woods and the faint silhouette of my truck parked beside the RV. But then there it was, a figure standing still, halfway between the trees and my vehicle. At first, I figured it was just another camper who'd wandered over to the wrong site, but then I realized there wasn't supposed to be anyone else this far out. I didn't even hear the sound of another RV or car coming in earlier. I squinted, trying to make out more details. The figure stood there frozen, almost like it was waiting for something. They were tall, lanky, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie, but something felt off. My gut was telling me this wasn't just some lost hiker, and you don't ignore gut feelings out here. I grabbed my flashlight, hesitating before I opened the RV door. There wasn't much else I could do. I didn't own a gun, never really saw the need in the city, and honestly, I'd thought the RV would provide enough protection from whatever the woods had to offer. You know, deer, maybe a curious bear or something, not a strange man lurking outside. The moment I stepped outside, the figure bolted fast. I shined my flashlight in the direction they ran, catching a glimpse of a dirty face, long stringy hair, and something like a wild grin flashing in the dark. But before I could process it, they were gone, disappearing into the thick trees. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that maybe it was just some vagrant who didn't want trouble, but when I got back inside, something had changed. The flashlight beam caught a reflection on the passenger seat of my RV. My heart sank when I saw it. A large hunting knife jammed into the seat. It wasn't mine. Now I know what you're thinking. How could I have missed someone sneaking into my RV? I couldn't tell you. Maybe I had dozed off earlier, or maybe this guy was just good at what he did. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't alone, and whoever this guy was, he had keys. I fumbled for my phone, planning to call the Rangers, but of course, out here, there was no signal. So, like any rational person, I locked every door and window, grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I had, a camping hatchet, and sat in the driver's seat, keeping an eye on the tree line. I wasn't planning on staying the night anymore. First light, I was getting the hell out of there, but first light didn't come fast enough. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion overriding my adrenaline, because the next thing I knew, it was around 2 a.m., and the entire RV shook. It wasn't a tree falling or some kind of animal bumping into it. It was deliberate, like someone was trying to force their way in. I jumped up, clutching the hatchet, and shouted out, hoping to scare them off, but the pounding didn't stop. When the door finally flew open, it wasn't subtle. The figure from earlier barreled in, wild and grinning, holding a crowbar. There was no conversation, no demands. He lunged at me immediately, swinging the crowbar, catching me off guard. I swung back with the hatchet, but missed. He was faster than I expected. I won't bore you with the gory details, but let's just say it wasn't one of those quick, clean self-defense moments you see in the movies. I got some good hits in, but not before he bashed me pretty good with the crowbar. Blood was everywhere. His, mine. It all blended together in the chaos. At some point, we both fell out of the RV and the fight spilled onto the ground. I don't know how, but I got the upper hand, slamming the hatchet down into his chest. The fight stopped then, just like that. I remember standing over him, gasping for air, not really registering what had happened until I saw the light dimming in his wild eyes. He was gone. I staggered back into the RV, dazed, bloody, and in shock. I locked myself inside, not knowing what else to do. Calling for help wasn't an option out here, so I waited. Just me, the dead guy outside in the silence of the forest. By the time morning rolled around, I was still wide awake, eyes fixed on the body outside. I don't know why I hadn't moved it. Maybe I just needed the daylight to confirm it wasn't some sick nightmare. Eventually, I stepped out, the crisp mountain air biting at my face. I searched the man's pockets, half expecting to find nothing, but there it was. His wallet. His name was Warren Gibson. He was wanted in 3 states for murder, and here I was, alone with his body, no cell service, and a whole mess of questions I didn't have the answers to. The cops eventually found me that afternoon after a couple of hikers came across my bloodied RV and freaked out. They took one look at me, the body, and started asking the usual questions. I don't even remember half of what I told them, just that it was self-defense, which, to be fair, was the truth. Turns out Warren had been squatting in the mountains for years, preying on isolated campers. They'd been looking for him for a long time. Funny thing is, I'd planned this trip to escape the chaos of the city, to find some peace and quiet. I ended up right in the middle of someone else's nightmare. Still, all things considered, I guess I got off easy. My name is Michael Lopez. I'm 31 years old, and up until last week, I prided myself on being fearless. I've explored abandoned hospitals, trekked through deserts, and even camped alone in bear country. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Goose Lake. I still don't know if I'm lucky to have escaped or cursed because I went there in the first place. It all started with a tip from one of my subscribers. I'm a travel blogger, and my channel focuses on exploring offbeat places, especially ones with creepy or mysterious reputations. A viewer messaged me about Goose Lake, a small body of water tucked away near Clinton, Iowa, and its supposed haunting by the drowned maiden. According to local legend, a woman named Mary Abbott drowned there in the late 1800s under suspicious circumstances. Some say she was killed by a jealous lover, others claim she lures people to their deaths. It sounded perfect for my next video. I arrived at Goose Lake on a chilly October afternoon. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the water, still and dark, mirrored the overcast sky. The place was eerily beautiful, exactly the kind of location my audience loved. The first person I met was a fisherman named Nathan. He was pulling his boat up onto the shore as I parked my RV. "You camping here?" he asked, squinting at me like I just told him I planned to swim with sharks. "Yeah, just for the night," I said, grabbing my camera gear. "I heard there's some cool history here." Nathan snorted. "History, sure, but not the kind you want to mess with." He told me about Mary Abbott's ghost, how people claim to hear her crying or calling their names at night. "If you're smart, you'll leave before sunset," he added, shaking his head. I laughed it off. I've heard plenty of spooky stories over the years, and none of them ever scared me off. Besides, I had a video to make. I spent the afternoon exploring the lake's edge, filming the dense woods and the water's inky surface. It was peaceful enough, at least at first, but as I was flying my drone over the lake, it suddenly veered off course and crashed into the water. "Damn it," I muttered, wading in to retrieve it. The water was icy cold, and as I pulled the drone out, I glanced down at the surface. That's when I saw it, a fleeting reflection of a pale, distorted face staring up at me. I froze, my heart pounding, but when I looked again, the reflection was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, I was primed to see something spooky, wasn't I? Back in the RV, I checked the footage from the drone. Most of it was fine until the last few seconds, that's where the camera captured a faint figure standing at the edge of the lake. It was too far away to make out details, but it sent a chill down my spine. As darkness fell, the lake took on an oppressive silence. No frogs croaking, no crickets chirping, just the sound of my own breathing. I cooked a quick dinner on the tiny RV stove, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard it, a soft knock on the RV door. My stomach twisted. Who could be out here at this hour? I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door. No one was there. I stepped outside, scanning the area. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground. Wet footprints leading from the water to my RV. They were small, like a child's, and they ended abruptly at the door. A shiver ran down my spine and I bolted back inside, locking the door behind me. By morning, the eerie events felt almost like a dream. Determined to shake off the fear, I drove into town to meet Maggie O'Connor, a local historian who ran a shop filled with books, antiques, and trinkets. Maggie was delighted to talk about Goose Lake. Mary Abbott was a tragic figure, she said, her hands clasped over a steaming cup of tea. She was engaged to a wealthy man, but when he discovered she'd been unfaithful, he drowned her in the lake. Do you believe she haunts the place? I asked, half joking. Maggie's expression darkened. I do. Many people have seen her, heard her crying. Some say she tries to pull them into the water, as if she's still searching for her lover or her revenge. Before I left, Maggie handed me a small iron charm. For protection, she said, just in case. I returned to the lake feeling more uneasy than I wanted to admit. As night fell, the air grew heavy and an unnatural fog rolled in, obscuring the shoreline. Then the voices started. At first, they were faint, like whispers carried on the wind. But soon they grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but they were definitely calling my name. I stayed inside the RV, clutching the iron charm Maggie had given me. My camera sat on the table, still recording in case anything happened. Around 3 a.m., I saw her. She stood at the edge of the fog, her figure barely visible in the dim light of the moon. Her dress was tattered and dripping wet, her hair hanging in clumps around her pale face, and her hollow, empty eyes were fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She raised a hand, beckoning me to come closer. The whispers grew deafening, filling the air with an otherworldly hum. I don't know what possessed me to go outside. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was her voice, soft and pleading, calling my name. As I stepped closer to the lake, the fog thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud. The water lapped at the shore, dark and inviting. Michael, she whispered, her voice a blend of sorrow and rage. She reached out to me, her cold, wet fingers brushing my arm. In that moment, I felt a wave of despair so overwhelming it nearly brought me to my knees. It was like drowning in grief. But then I remembered the charm. I gripped it tightly, its rough edges digging into my palm. The ghost recoiled, letting out a piercing scream that shattered the silence. I stumbled back, breaking free of the fog. I didn't stop running until I was in the driver's seat of my RV, tearing down the dirt road as fast as the vehicle could go. Later, when I reviewed the footage, I saw her again. Her face appearing in the reflections of the lake in the windows of my RV, even in the fog. She was always watching. I uploaded the video, and it went viral. People debated whether it was real or staged, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I would never, ever go back to Goose Lake. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear her voice calling my name. I'd been driving for hours, the narrow desert highway stretching endlessly in front of me. The sun was a golden orb sinking behind the mesas, painting the sky in fiery hues. My RV rattled as the pavement turned to dirt, the road leading me deeper into the vast, silent expanse of Canyon Hollow. This was where I wanted to be, alone, surrounded by nothing but red rock and the occasional shriek of a hawk. I needed to clear my head, to find some kind of peace, or at least a distraction. 6 months had passed since the accident, but the guilt was as raw as ever. I should have been more careful. I couldn't escape that thought, no matter how far I drove. Canyon Hollow was famous for its petroglyphs, remnants of an ancient people whose art told stories of life, death, and something in between. It was also infamous for its mysteries, tales of settlers who vanished, of travelers who never made it out. But I didn't believe in that sort of thing. History was history, nothing more. I pulled into the campground as dusk settled, parking near the edge of the canyon. There were only 2 other campers, an older couple in a beat-up RV several spots down. They waved as I stepped out, and I gave them a nod. The silence of the desert was almost unnerving, the kind of quiet that pressed on your ears. I shook it off and set up camp, promising myself a good night's rest before exploring the next day. That first night, I dreamed of the accident. I was back on the ridge, the rocks crumbling beneath my feet. I heard Alex shouting, his voice raw with panic. My hands reached out for him, but I wasn't fast enough. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight. The silence outside was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the RV as it settled into the cool desert air. I stepped outside for some fresh air. The moon hung high, casting long shadows over the red rocks. I could see the older couple's RV, their lights off. Beyond them, the canyon stretched out, an ocean of darkness. That's when I heard it, a faint voice carried on the wind. Ethan. I froze, my heart pounding. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was Alex's. Impossible, I told myself. Just a trick of the wind. I stood there for a moment, staring into the void before retreating to the safety of the RV. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. The sun was bright, and the desert looked almost friendly in the daylight. I packed a bag with water and snacks and set off to explore the petroglyphs. The trail was rugged, winding through narrow canyons and open plains dotted with junipers. The carvings appeared in clusters, etched into the stone with astonishing precision. Animals, spirals, figures locked in what looked like dances or battles. Then I found the symbols. Unlike the other carvings, these were jagged and erratic, spirals that twisted into themselves like whirlpools. They didn't fit with the rest of the art. Standing there, I felt a chill despite the sun. It wasn't just the symbols, it was the silence. No birds, no wind, just me and the rocks. When I got back to camp, the older couple's RV was gone. At first, I thought they'd left while I was out, but their spot was wrong. Their folding chairs were still there, along with a cooler and a half-empty coffee mug. Their fire pit had ashes that were still warm. I walked over, calling out, but no one answered. The RV keys were sitting on the folding table as if they'd just stepped away for a moment. A heavy unease settled over me, but I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they'd gone for a hike. Maybe they'd gotten a ride into town. But as night fell, the unease turned into something closer to fear. The wind picked up after sundown, howling through the canyon like a living thing. I sat inside the RV, trying to focus on anything but the emptiness outside. That's when I noticed the journal. It was sitting on my passenger seat, leather-bound and worn. I hadn't seen it there before. My pulse quickened as I flipped it open. The handwriting was shaky but legible, the entries chronicling the travels of someone who had camped here before me. At first, the notes were mundane, descriptions of the canyon, complaints about the heat, but as the entries went on, they grew darker. Something is out there. I see shadows at night, faces in the mirrors. I thought I was alone, but I'm not. They're watching me. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. Don't let them in. No matter what you hear, don't let them in. I snapped the journal shut, my hands trembling. The RV groaned as the wind buffeted it, and for a moment I thought I heard a knock at the door. Just the wind, I told myself. But then it came again, louder. Hello? I called, my voice shaking. No answer. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The desert stretched out before me, empty and silent. But then I saw them, footprints in the dirt, leading from the ridge down to my RV. My stomach turned. That night, I barricaded the door with everything I could find. Sleep was out of the question. The whispers started around midnight, faint at first, then louder. They called my name, voices I recognized but couldn't place. Alex was one of them. I covered my ears, rocking back and forth until the sun came up. The next day, I decided to leave. I packed up as fast as I could and started the engine, relief flooding me when it roared to life. But as I drove toward the exit, the road twisted and looped, always bringing me back to the campground. I tried every direction, but it was no use. It was like the canyon wouldn't let me go. Desperation drove me back to the petroglyphs. I followed the spirals, hoping they held some kind of answer. The silence was crushing now, the air heavy with dread. And then I saw it, a wagon train, fully intact, crossing the canyon in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mirage, but as I got closer, the figures became clearer. Men, women, and children in 19th century clothing. Their faces were pale, their movements slow and deliberate. I shouted, waving my arms, but they didn't react. As I approached, they vanished, leaving only skeletal remains of wagons and rusted tools in their wake. That night, they came for me. I sat in the RV, knife in hand, as shadows moved outside. The voices were louder now, pleading and accusing all at once. "Why did you leave me, Ethan?" Alex's voice cut through the din, filled with anger and sorrow. The windows fogged as hollow faces pressed against the glass, their empty eye sockets weeping black tears. They began to bang on the walls, the door shaking on its hinges. "You can't hide," they whispered. "You belong here with us." I thought of the journal, of its warning not to let them in. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with guilt and regret. I clutched the knife, my knuckles white. Then I remembered the spirals. The petroglyphs had to mean something. A way out, a key. I grabbed Alex's compass, the only keepsake I had of him, and bolted from the RV. The shadows followed, their whispers echoing through the canyon. I reached the spirals and fell to my knees, holding the compass above the carvings. "I'm sorry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, Alex." The air grew still. The shadows stopped moving. One by one, they dissolved into the canyon mist, their voices fading into silence. The compass grew warm in my hand before falling still. The road was clear. The next morning, I didn't question it. I drove until the canyon was a distant memory, the horizon opening up before me. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching, that someday, somewhere, the whispers will start again. When we first arrived at Shenandoah National Park, I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The towering trees, the vast open skies, and the faint sound of birds singing in the distance. This was exactly the kind of break we all needed. I'm Alex, the planner of the group, and I'd organized this camping trip to get away from the stress of city life. Mark, my boyfriend, sat in the passenger seat beside me, relaxed and smiling as we made our way along the winding mountain road. Behind us in the RV were Jessica and Eric, my two closest friends. They weren't exactly the outdoorsy type, but they'd agreed to come along, maybe out of some sense of duty to reconnect. Eric was already cracking jokes about how bad he'd be at camping, while Jessica half laughed nervously, fiddling with her phone. I remember feeling so confident, so prepared. I'd planned everything, except, of course, for the things no one could plan for. We parked the RV at a small, secluded site off the Appalachian Trail, far from the more populated areas. That was the whole point: isolation, serenity, nature at its purest. The weather was supposed to be clear all weekend, perfect for hiking and camping. As we started setting up camp, the first signs of trouble were small. Jessica complained about her shoes. "These hiking boots are killing me. Why did I even buy them?" she groaned. "They're probably just stiff," I said, brushing her off. I was already focused on getting the tent up, but that's when I noticed Mark shaking his head. "The tent's missing poles," he said, laughing a little. "We'll have to use the RV for tonight." "Fine," I replied, hiding my frustration. "Minor setbacks, nothing more." The real trouble began as dusk fell. It was subtle at first. As we sat around the small campfire Mark had built, the woods around us seemed to grow quieter. The bird song, once a pleasant background, faded into nothing. No wind stirred the leaves, and even the occasional sound of wildlife disappeared. I chalked it up to the natural rhythms of the forest, nocturnal creatures and all that, but then I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, a whiff of something rotten, like spoiled meat. I thought maybe it was something in the air or that something had died nearby. I didn't mention it, not wanting to freak anyone out. Eric, of course, was oblivious to the shift in mood. He was still joking around, telling some story about a horror movie he'd seen last week. "This place reminds me of one of those settings," he said, grinning as he poked at the fire. "A group of friends in the middle of nowhere, and then bam, haunted by some spirit or creature." "Shut up," Jessica muttered, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough already." I rolled my eyes at them both, but Mark shifted uneasily beside me, glancing out into the darkening woods. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he stood up, suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said, feeling a flicker of irritation. We'd barely been here a few hours and they were already on edge. "I swear I heard something," he said, his voice tense, like footsteps, heavy, coming from the woods. Eric laughed, but it was strained. "It's probably a bear or something, or maybe Bigfoot." Jessica looked pale, her eyes darting to the dark forest around us. "This isn't funny, guys." "It's nothing," I said firmly. "Just the woods settling down for the night. Let's not spook ourselves over nothing. But as the evening wore on, that smell of rot kept coming back, and so did the uneasy silence. Even the crackle of the fire felt muted. The next day was supposed to be better. We set out on the trail, hoping to shake off the weirdness of the night before. The weather was colder than expected, with thick mist hanging low in the valley, making everything damp. Jessica slipped a few times on the muddy path, cursing under her breath. "This fog is so creepy," she muttered. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "It'll clear up once the sun's out. Let's just enjoy the hike." But I could tell he was uneasy too. None of us had slept well. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard something moving outside the RV. Maybe it was my imagination, but something kept waking me up, like a low rustling or breathing. Halfway through the hike, we reached a lookout point. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the rolling hills stretching out below us. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Then I saw Mark, standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the distance. "Mark!" I called. He didn't answer. I walked over to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He pointed, his face pale. "Do you see that?" I squinted, looking where he was pointing. At first I saw nothing but trees, but then something moved, a figure, tall and gaunt, barely visible through the mist. It stood completely still, as though it had been there the entire time, watching. "It's just a hiker," I said, though my voice sounded less confident than I'd hoped. "That's no hiker," Mark whispered. "Look at it." The figure stood too tall, its limbs too thin, and its skin seemed pale, almost translucent. But before I could get a better look, it was gone, melted into the fog. By the time we got back to the RV, the mood had soured. Mark was withdrawn, barely speaking, and Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder as though she expected something to jump out at us. The smell returned as we gathered around the campfire again that night. This time, it was stronger, more pungent, like decaying meat left out in the sun. Eric wrinkled his nose. "Okay, seriously, what is that?" "It's the woods," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. The silence pressed down on us like a weight, and then, from deep in the trees, we heard it. A voice, soft, distant, but unmistakably human. "Help me." We all froze. "What the hell?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide. The voice came again, a little closer. "Help. Help me." "It's someone in trouble," Mark said, standing up. "We need to go check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't. That doesn't sound right." The voice was too calm, too controlled. There was no panic in it, no urgency. It sounded wrong, like it was echoing in the wrong direction. Jessica was shaking now, her face pale. "We have to leave. I don't like this." For once, Eric wasn't joking. "Yeah, maybe we should call it quits." But Mark was already moving toward the trees. "Mark, stop!" I hissed, following him. "This is crazy." He didn't stop. He kept walking toward the voice, his expression blank, as if he were in a trance. I reached out, grabbing him and pulling him back just as a figure emerged from the fog, the same gaunt figure we'd seen earlier. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its eyes hollow black pits. My blood turned to ice. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, its body moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like it didn't know how to walk properly. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted its head to the side, staring at us with those empty, soulless eyes. Mark stumbled back, snapping out of whatever trance had held him. We need to go now." The four of us rushed to the RV, slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, the figure circled the clearing, watching us, waiting. The next few hours were a blur of panic. We tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. The flashlight batteries drained within minutes. Every time we looked outside, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. "We're trapped," Eric muttered, pacing the small space of the RV. "What the hell is that thing?" "It's not real," I said, though even I wasn't sure anymore. It can't be. But it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. Mark sat in the corner, his head in his hands. "It's the Wendigo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" I asked, staring at him. "The Wendigo," he repeated. "It's an old Native American legend, a spirit of insatiable hunger. It drives people mad, makes them turn on each other." "That's ridiculous," I said, but my voice shook. "I've heard of it," Eric said, his face pale. "It feeds on fear and hunger." A cold realization washed over me. The constant hunger we'd all been feeling, the strange cravings, the paranoia. Everything had started the moment we'd arrived. "It's trying to drive us mad," Mark said, his eyes wild. "That's why it hasn't attacked. It wants us to destroy each other." By the time night fell, the Wendigo was closer, standing just outside the RV, its gaunt, twisted face pressed against the window, its fingers tapping softly on the glass, and Jessica couldn't take it anymore. "I have to get out of here," she screamed, bolting for the door. "Wait," I shouted, but it was too late. She was already outside, running into the woods. We rushed after her, but the fog swallowed her whole. I could hear her screaming, her voice echoing through the trees. And then, silence. We found her body a few minutes later. Her limbs were twisted, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The Wendigo stood over her, watching, its empty eyes locked on us. "We need to leave," Mark said, his voice shaking now. We stumbled back to the RV, but as we slammed the door shut, I saw the look in Mark's eyes. The hunger had taken hold of him. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting toward me, then Eric. "He's not right," Eric whispered. "It's inside him." Mark lunged at me, his hands grasping at my throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't stop it." I struggled, pushing him off, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Eric grabbed a metal pipe and stood over him, ready to strike if he tried again. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Wendigo was still outside, waiting. As we approached, the fog began to lift. We packed what little we could carry and made a run for it, leaving the RV behind. The Wendigo didn't follow, it just watched, its hollow eyes locked onto us as we disappeared down the trail. Even now, I can still feel its gaze like it's always there, just beyond the edge of my vision, watching, waiting. I'll never go back to the wilderness again. Not after what I've seen. Not after what we've done. My name is Brian Gibson, and back in 2019, I decided to take my RV up to the remote stretches of the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. I'd always been a fan of the great outdoors, fresh air, towering pines, and the kind of silence you can't find in the city. As a freelance photographer, I figured the solitude would do me good, but maybe even help me capture that award-winning shot. I had recently gone through a rough patch, a breakup that left me questioning if my jokes were really as funny as I thought. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. I'd quip, only to be met with groans. Maybe my sense of humor needed a new audience. The drive was long but scenic. Snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, and crystal-clear rivers snaked alongside the winding roads. When I finally reached the RV park near Katak Bay, it was nearly dusk. A handful of other RVs dotted the area, but they were spaced far apart, giving everyone a sense of privacy. After setting up camp, I decided to stretch my legs. I wandered toward the communal fire pit where a few campers were gathered. An older couple, the Millers, greeted me warmly. "First time up here?" Mr. Miller asked. "Yeah, thought I'd try my luck photographing some eagles," I replied. "Be careful if you wander too far," Mrs. Miller warned. "People have gone missing around these parts." I chuckled, thinking it was a local attempt at spooking the newbie. "Thanks for the tip. I'll make sure not to get lost." As the night wore on, we exchanged stories. I even tested out a new pun. "Did you hear about the guy who invented lifesavers? They say he made a mint." This time, I got a few genuine laughs. The next morning, I grabbed my camera and headed into the woods. The forest was dense, but beams of sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. I snapped photos of anything that caught my eye: a squirrel nibbling on a nut, a formation of birds overhead, the intricate patterns of moss on a fallen log. About an hour in, I stumbled upon something that made me pause. A makeshift campsite that looked abandoned. A tent was collapsed and belongings were strewn about. Oddly, a coffee mug half filled with rainwater sat atop the log as if someone had just been there. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I felt a slight unease but brushed it off. Maybe someone left in a hurry due to an emergency. As I turned to leave, I noticed something partially buried under leaves, a small notebook. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was a journal. The last entry read, "I think I'm being followed. Footsteps outside my tent last night. Must be the wind, but it feels off." A chill ran through me, not the metaphorical kind, but an actual cold breeze that seemed out of place on this mild day. I decided it was time to head back. On my way, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the bushes had me on edge. Maybe the trees have eyes, I joked to myself, trying to lighten the mood. Or maybe I've watched too many horror movies. When I returned to the RV park, I noticed that the RV next to mine, a vintage Airstream, had its door wide open. I hadn't seen anyone come or go since I arrived. Approaching cautiously, I called out, "Anyone home?" Silence. Inside, the place was a mess. Dishes were broken on the floor and the cushions were slashed. It didn't look ransacked, it looked frenzied, like someone left in a hurry or didn't leave at all. I backed out and went straight to the park's main office. The manager, a gruff man named Dale, looked up from his magazine as I entered. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Yeah, the RV next to mine looks like it's been trashed. Door was open, nobody's inside." Dale sighed. "That spot's been empty for weeks, shouldn't be anyone there." "Well, someone's been there, and I found an abandoned campsite in the woods." He frowned. "Best to mind your own business. Forest can be unpredictable." "Unpredictable? That's the best you got?" I retorted. He gave me a stern look. "People come and go. Not my job to keep track." Frustrated, I left the office. Maybe I was overreacting, but something didn't sit right. I decided to do a little digging. I headed to a local diner, figuring small-town gossip might shed some light. Over a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, a friendly woman named Karen. "Has anyone gone missing around here lately?" I asked casually. She hesitated before answering. "Why do you ask?" I told her about the campsite and the RV. She lowered her voice. "There have been rumors. Hikers not returning, campers disappearing. The authorities chalk it up to getting lost, but locals think there's more to it." "Like what?" She glanced around before leaning in. "Some say there's a man living deep in the woods, calls himself the Huntsman. They say he doesn't take kindly to outsiders." I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a bad fairy tale. Believe what you want, but I'd be careful if I were you." On my way back to the RV park, I mulled over what she'd said. An isolated area like this could easily harbor a recluse, but a dangerous one? It seemed far-fetched. That evening, as I reviewed the photos on my camera, I noticed something odd. In one of the shots in the background, partially obscured by trees, was a figure. Zooming in, I could make out a man standing still, watching me. He wore tattered clothing, and his face was shadowed by a hood. "Great, Brian, you've got your own personal Bigfoot," I muttered. I decided to report this to the local police. The station was small, manned by a single officer named Peterson. After showing him the photo, he shrugged. "Probably a hunter or another camper. In jeans and a hoodie. Doesn't look like typical hunting gear." He sighed. "Look, we get city folks up here all the time thinking they've seen something wild. Unless there's a crime, there's not much I can do." "People are disappearing," I pressed. "People get lost. It's a big wilderness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have paperwork to do." Feeling dismissed, I returned to my RV. Night had fallen and the park was eerily quiet. I locked the doors and double-checked the windows. Maybe I should have brought that baseball bat after all, I joked weakly. Around midnight, I awoke to a faint scraping sound against the side of the RV. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. Was it an animal? The wind? Then came a whisper, barely audible. "Come out and play." I froze. This was no animal. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. "Of course," I whispered. The scraping continued, moving toward the door. I needed a plan. Looking around, I spotted a flare gun I kept for emergencies. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, I swung the door open and fired the flare into the darkness. The sudden light illuminated a figure standing a few yards away. His face was gaunt, eyes wild, and in his hand he held a crude, blood-stained knife. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut and bolted it. Adrenaline surged through me. I heard footsteps circling the RV, followed by a thud on the roof. "Seriously? This guy thinks he's in an action movie," I muttered, trying to steady my nerves. I remembered that the RV had a roof hatch. If he got in, I'd be trapped. I had to act. Grabbing my keys, I scrambled to the driver's seat. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. "Time to go," I said, flooring the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, throwing me back slightly. From the side mirror, I saw the man lose his footing and tumble off the roof. As I sped toward the main road, something hit the windshield. A rock, cracking the glass but not shattering it. I didn't look back again. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a gas station that was still open. Bursting inside, I startled the clerk. "Call the police. There's a maniac out there," I shouted. He grabbed the phone and dialed. Minutes later, Officer Peterson arrived. I recounted everything, my words tumbling out in a rush. He seemed skeptical, but agreed to follow me back. When we returned to the RV park, there was no sign of the man. The area around my RV was undisturbed. No cracks in the windshield, no marks on the door. "This is impossible," I insisted. "He was here." Peterson looked at me carefully. "Have you been drinking?" "What?" "No." Sometimes the isolation can play tricks on people. Frustrated and exhausted, I knew arguing was pointless. "Fine, but I'm leaving first thing in the morning." He nodded. "Might be best." That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound set me on edge. By dawn, I was packed and ready to leave. As I drove away, I saw Dale, the manager, watching me from his office window. For a moment, our eyes met, and I could have sworn he smirked. I decided to make one last stop at the diner for breakfast. Karen was there, surprised to see me leaving so soon. "Yeah, had enough adventure for one trip," I said. She leaned in. "Be careful on your way out and watch for detours." I didn't think much of it until I hit the road. About an hour into the drive, signs indicated a detour ahead due to construction. Following the new route, I realized it led me deeper into the forest. "This can't be right," I said aloud. The road narrowed and the trees grew denser. Suddenly, the RV sputtered and came to a halt. "Out of gas? Impossible. I filled up yesterday." Stepping outside, I felt the weight of the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness. From behind a tree, the man emerged. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dale and Officer Peterson stepped out beside him. "What is this?" I demanded. Dale chuckled. "You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Peterson added. "Should have minded your own business." Panic surged through me. "Why are you doing this?" "The huntsman needs his prey," the gaunt man whispered, a twisted smile on his face. I backed away slowly. "Look, I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." Karen's words echoed in my mind. "Watch for detours." Realizing this was planned, I knew I had to act fast. Without warning, I sprinted into the woods. Branches slapped my face and roots threatened to trip me, but adrenaline kept me going. Behind me, I heard them crashing through the underbrush. "You can't run forever," Dale shouted. Spotting a ravine ahead, I made a split-second decision. I slid down the embankment, landing hard but uninjured. A shallow cave caught my eye, a potential hiding spot. I squeezed inside, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Footsteps approached the edge of the ravine. "Spread out." "He couldn't have gone far," Peterson ordered. They moved away, their voices fading. I waited, counting the minutes. When I was sure they were gone, I emerged cautiously. The forest seemed endless, but I remembered that rivers often lead to towns. Listening carefully, I detected the faint sound of running water. Following it, I eventually reached a riverbank. Upstream, I saw a small bridge, and beyond that, the glint of metal train tracks. Hope surged within me. Staying low, I made my way to the tracks. In the distance, a train whistle blew. I hurried along the rails, waving frantically. The conductor must have seen me because the train began to slow down. As it came to a halt, a worker leaned out. "What's going on?" "Please, I need help. There are people trying to kill me." He gestured for me to climb aboard. "Get in. We'll take you to the next station." Relief washed over me as the train pulled away, safe, at least for now. At the station, I contacted the state police. This time, they took me seriously. An investigation was launched. Days later, authorities discovered that Dale, Peterson, and several others were part of a cult that hunted unsuspecting travelers. They operated in remote areas, making it easy to cover their tracks. Multiple bodies were found near the RV park and surrounding woods, victims who weren't as lucky as me. The huntsman, whose real name was Victor Hale, was a former survivalist with a penchant for violence. His motivations were rooted in a twisted belief that he was cleansing the world of outsiders. With the ring exposed, arrests were made. The RV park was shut down and the area became the subject of national news. As for me, I returned home grateful to be alive. My brush with death had been too close, too real. I later learned that Karen had tipped off the authorities anonymously, providing crucial information. Her subtle warnings had been her way of helping without drawing attention. In the end, justice was served, and the victims' families got the closure they deserved. My name is Paul Miller, and back in 2015, I decided to take my RV up to Olympic National Park in Washington to escape the constant buzz of city life. As a software engineer glued to screens all day, I figured some fresh air might do me good. Funny thing is, my idea of roughing it usually involves weak Wi-Fi signals, so this was a big step for me. I arrived at the park on a Friday afternoon, the towering evergreens and misty air greeting me like an old friend I'd never met. I found a secluded spot near a small creek, perfect for pretending I knew anything about fishing. After setting up camp, which took longer than I'd like to admit, I settled into a folding chair with a cold beer. The sounds of nature were a symphony compared to the car horns and sirens back home. As dusk approached, I started a campfire and roasted some hot dogs. I even attempted to tell myself ghost stories, but ended up laughing at how cliché it all felt. Look at me, living off the land, I chuckled, ignoring the fully stocked RV behind me. Just as the stars began to peek through the canopy, I heard rustling in the bushes. Probably a raccoon or a squirrel, I thought. But then I heard it again. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Silence. Shrugging it off, I went back to my fire, poking at the embers. A snapping twig made me jump. "If that's you, Yogi Bear, I'm fresh out of picnic baskets," I joked nervously. Still no response. Deciding to turn in for the night, I extinguished the fire and locked up the RV. Climbing into bed, I told myself I was being ridiculous. This is what I came here for. Peace, quiet, and maybe a little solitude-induced paranoia. Around midnight, a tapping sound on the window woke me up. Tap! Tap! I sat up, my heart pounding. "Probably a tree branch," I whispered, but as I listened, the tapping grew more persistent. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept toward the window and peered out. Nothing but darkness. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the tree line, a shadow slipping between the trunks. I swallowed hard. "Okay, Paul, it's just your mind playing tricks." The next morning, the sunlight made everything seem foolishly safe again. I decided to go for a hike, thinking some exercise might help shake off the jitters from the night before. I packed a small backpack with snacks and water, leaving my phone behind since there was no signal anyway. About an hour into the trail, I came across another campsite, or what was left of it. The tent was shredded, and belongings were scattered haphazardly. Clothes, a backpack, even a pair of hiking boots lay strewn about. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I approached cautiously, noticing dark stains on some of the torn fabric. My stomach tightened. This wasn't normal. "Maybe it's a prank," I muttered, hoping to convince myself. A low chuckle sounded from behind me. I spun around to see a man standing a few yards away. He was tall and lanky, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been worn for weeks. His eyes had a wild glint to them. "Did you do this?" I asked, my voice wavering. He tilted his head, a crooked smile spreading across his face. "Just cleaning up the neighborhood," he replied. "Look, if this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny," I said, taking a step back. He pulled out a hunting knife, the blade catching the sunlight. Who said anything about joking? Without thinking, I turned and ran. Adrenaline surged through me as I dashed back toward my campsite. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, fast and unyielding. "Come on, man, let's talk about this," I shouted over my shoulder, though I doubted reasoning was an option. I veered off the path, dodging trees and jumping over roots. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they might give out, but I couldn't stop, not if I wanted to live. Bursting through a thicket, I spotted a ranger station up ahead. Relief flooded over me. "Help! Someone help!" I yelled. I stumbled up the steps and pounded on the door. No response. I tried the handle. It was locked. "You've got to be kidding me." A quick glance back showed the man closing in, his knife glinting menacingly. Desperate, I grabbed a large rock and smashed the window of the station door, reaching in to unlock it. I dove inside and slammed the door shut, pushing a heavy desk in front of it. My pursuer reached the door and began pounding on it, the wood creaking under the force. Frantically, I searched the room for anything useful. On the wall hung a map, a radio, and a rifle mounted above the desk. "Thank you, Second Amendment," I breathed. I pulled the rifle down and checked the chamber. Loaded. The door started to splinter. The man's manic laughter echoed through the small space. "Last chance to walk away," I shouted, aiming the rifle at the door. He didn't reply. The door gave way and he lunged into the room. I fired instinctively. The shot hit him in the shoulder, causing him to stagger back. He looked at the wound and then back at me, his smile never fading. "That wasn't very neighborly," he sneered. "Stay back," I warned, cocking the rifle again. He rushed forward. I fired a second shot, this time hitting him in the leg. He collapsed to the floor but continued to crawl toward me, dragging the knife along the wooden boards. "Why won't you stop?" I yelled, panic rising. He chuckled. "Because this is the most fun I've had in years." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the gunshots or the shattering glass. Relief mixed with terror as I realized help was on the way, but I wasn't safe yet. He made one last effort to reach me, raising the knife. I swung the butt of the rifle down on his head, and he finally went limp. Moments later, park rangers and police officers stormed in. They pulled me aside, securing the man in handcuffs. "Are you hurt?" one of the officers asked. "Just shaken," I replied, adrenaline still coursing through me. They took my statement while medics tended to the man, who was surprisingly still alive. "Do you know who he is?" I asked one of the rangers. He exchanged a look with the officer. "Name's Arthur Slade. Used to be a biology professor before he went off the grid. Rumor has it he lost his mind after a research project went wrong." "Great, I always knew academia was dangerous," I said, attempting a weak smile. They searched his makeshift campsite and found belongings from several missing hikers. It seemed I'd stumbled upon a serial killer's playground. As they led him away, he glanced back at me, that eerie smile still plastered on his face. "See you around, neighbor," he called out. "Let's hope not," I muttered. The authorities escorted me back to my RV, which was thankfully untouched. "We recommend you stay somewhere else for the night," and the officer advised. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing," I agreed. I drove to the nearest town and checked into a motel, the kind with flickering neon signs that usually screamed "bad decision." But it felt like a five-star resort after what I'd been through. The next day, I headed home, deciding that maybe the city's noise wasn't so bad after all. Before leaving, I stopped by the police station to wrap up some paperwork. "You're lucky to be alive?" the officer said as I signed the last form. "Trust me, I know," I replied. They informed me that Arthur Slade had been linked to multiple disappearances over the past few years. A brilliant mind turned murderous recluse. "Any idea why he did it?" I asked. "Revenge against society, maybe. Or just plain insanity." "Hard to say," the officer shrugged. As I walked out of the station, I couldn't help but think about how a simple camping trip had nearly cost me my life, all because I wanted to play Wilderness Explorer for a weekend. Back at home, I settled into my usual routine, the sounds of traffic oddly comforting. A week later, I received a call from the police. They'd found journals in Slade's campsite detailing his descent into madness and his twisted experiments on unsuspecting campers. At least now, with him behind bars, the park would be a bit safer.